Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Federation of Quebec Alzheimer's Society's online learning series. My name is Shalisa Capiday. I am a first link nurse at the Alzheimer's Society of Savoie. I'm very happy to be here with you today. So today's topic is going to be responsive behaviors. So what exactly do I mean by this? So we're talking about behaviors that present a particular challenge to the person with the disease. They might be challenging because of how frequent they are. They might be challenging because of how they affect the person's relation to their environment, to the people around them, whether that be their family members at home, whether that be care workers in different settings, or in a group setting, even the people, the other residents, the other people that they live with. They might be disruptive to how the person is able to perform certain activities, do their routine during their day, do meaningful activities. It might be disruptive even to the people around them and how they are able to do certain activities. Sometimes, worst case scenario, these can be those behaviors that might be dangerous for the person themselves or maybe again the people around them. So before really diving in, I want to back up a bit and talk about why we use the term responsive behavior. Because before intervening, we prefer to frame these behaviors as responses in themselves. This behavior is not happening in a vacuum. Usually the person is reacting or responding to something, what we call a trigger. And before intervening, it's important to identify those triggers. They can help us not just address the person's needs in the moment, they can help us to prevent these situations in the future, which is even more beneficial when we talk about quality of life for a person, as well as the quality of their environment. So instead of just talking about a disruptive behavior or just focusing on the challenge part of it, we want to look at, again, the meaning behind that behavior. Sometimes it's as if we can talk about the symptom of the disease and how that symptom is presenting itself in a certain behavior, but usually it's even more complex than that. If we take the example of the simple example, the person who keeps asking the same question, when are we going out? Where's my daughter? Is my daughter going to call me? And we answer that question, oh, your daughter's supposed to call you at 3. Well, yes, that's part of that is that person's memory impairment presenting itself. But usually there's another need there too, the need to maybe get help from, for example, the daughter. Maybe the person is just bored. There could be a few things fueling that question aside from just the memory loss. No, she doesn't remember that we answered the question, but something is provoking that particular question over and over again. And that can help us to not just answer the question in the moment, but to give a more meaningful intervention that will help the person continue with their day. So again, sometimes these behaviors are just a form of communication. The person has a need. They are expressing that need to the best of their ability. Yes, they have a disease that's impairing their ability, that's making it harder for them to express that need, but the need is still there. They need to maybe it's as simple as, a distress, to the need to get away from a source of distress. Maybe they're responding to a stressful environment. Maybe they need more or less stimulation. So yes, the disease is there. We're aware of the disease, but we're also aware that there are many, many factors going into why that person at this moment is behaving in that way. So a few examples. Sometimes, if we have the concern of the person keeps walking back and forth, they won't sit down, they don't seem to be able to calm down and rest, maybe they just want to go outside all the time, they're just always trying to leave the day center of the unit. Maybe it's a person that's undressing at inappropriate moments or places. Maybe it's a hyperactivity, the person who is singing all the time, not just during music therapy, but just literally all the time, and so on. So these behaviors might seem irrational, they might seem unreasonable, they might seem as disruptive to the outside world. Sometimes we get lower down that list, screaming, hitting people or objects. Those are all things that we tend to see as intensely volatile. And, sometimes the best thing you can do is just stand back for a second. Yes, these behaviors seem irrational, they seem erratic, but very often there's a sort of, there's still a meaning there. There's still some kind of internal reasoning. The person is disoriented, but again, they're acting this way for a reason somewhere. If we take, again, a small example, the person who wants to leave, the person who wakes up in a place that they don't know. Their family members are not there. They don't recognize where they are. They want to leave. They head for the door. Somebody stops them. You put yourself in that person's shoes, you would also maybe panic and push the person who's stopping you out of the way. You would be afraid because you don't understand what's happening to you. So it's not to de-dramatize what's happening or the need to respond to that situation, but it's understanding where that behavior is coming from, because once we access that empathy and we, like we were talking about in previous modules, look at the real emotions, validate the real emotions behind that behavior, we can better connect with that person. We can more effectively maybe reassure them and then redirect them to a more productive activity or moment. So again, when we talk about intervention, we always want to do it in the spirit of collaborating with the person. We're not trying to force them to do anything. We're trying to help them find the best quality for themselves. So, as an example, if we discuss again that what we tend to call wandering, usually the person who's going up and down the hallway, going for the door, we often, it's one of the big ones, one of the ones we hear the most about. But again, going through the reasons, and we realize that it's normal for a person to even just walk and move around. We're not made to sit in a chair all day. I think we're all realizing this more and more with COVID, that kind of feeling of restlessness. We're not meant to be cooped up. It's normal to want to go out, go to work, go outside, go to the park, go to the movies. And when you're not able to do that, we can see where that would cause some frustrated restlessness. So again, in long-term care especially, it's not, sometimes those needs can be hard to satisfy. And this can inform how we design long-term care settings in general. But in the meantime, it's important for us to normalize these behaviors, to talk about them in a normalizing way. So instead of saying, for example, Mrs. Jones is wandering, she's at risk of fugue, she's going to get lost, maybe just talk about, maybe just word it with a more literal description. Mrs. Jones is walking back and forth in the corridor. She mentioned that she would like to go outside. So when we were talking about the triggers, again, knowing what the trigger is can inform you for your solution. So we have a few categories here. We're going to go through them one by one. Let's start with physiological factors. So sometimes it's as simple as a hearing or vision impairment. Sometimes it's side effects of certain medications, physical discomfort, health problems, pain, fatigue. All of these can contribute to how that person is feeling and therefore how they're acting. A person might be more disoriented in their environment if they can't see it properly. If a person needs a hearing aid, they might be, and they're not wearing it right now, well, being able to follow verbal cues and directives might be even harder for them than just with their Alzheimer's alone. Side effects of certain medications can lead to sleeplessness, or they could lead to the person being more sleepy during the day and then affecting them, when it's time to go to bed at night and they don't feel like sleeping right now because they've been sleeping all day. Sometimes, as an example, that's something you can address more with their medication. Those first two together point out the importance of still having regular checkups for people. Even with Alzheimer's, you can have other health problems still. When we talk about physical discomfort and pain, that's something else that is affected by Alzheimer's, in that somebody with Alzheimer's does not always recognize that they're in pain. They might know that they're uncomfortable, but they can't tell you how or what the source is. So sometimes it's the importance of noting and sharing changes with the care team. As soon as somebody has a change, it should be noted and the right person on the team informed. So just giving another example of how this might present, sometimes, you might walk into a room and you walk up to Mrs. H and you go to give her meds, and she's just kind of bent in on her chair, and she looks, at first you think she's kind of grumpy or something, and walk up and give her medication, so smack your hand, and you think, oh, well, that's weird for her. I guess she's just upset today. And then that behavior persists throughout the morning. At a certain point, you might recognize the possibility that something happened. Maybe she took a little slip in the night or something and hurt herself. Maybe that's why she's all hunched over in her chair and doesn't want anybody to touch her. So, moving on to environmental factors. So sometimes this just means the temperature of the room. Something as simple as the temperature of the room can affect the person. Maybe I'm cold, and I know I'm cold, and I want to go get a sweater, but I'm not able to find my room. So I end up going up and down the hallway, and now everybody just thinks that I'm restless and wandering, but I'm not. I'm actually looking for my sweater, and sometimes I can express that to you. But sometimes we as the professionals have to play our Sherlock Holmes and think and detect that need for ourselves. If it's kind of cool on the floor and the person is just wearing a little t-shirt, and we know that this is somebody who has like 3 blankets on their bed, we can imagine that they might be kind of cold right now. So speaking of which, we mentioned maybe she knows she wants her sweater, maybe she can even express it to you, and she just needs to be led to her room. Sometimes, it's better for a person to be able to locate their room on their own. So how do we do that on the unit? Sometimes it's a question of putting pictures on the door, putting the person's own face, and sometimes having those familiar environments, and sometimes as we discussed in other recordings, having that familiar environment can be a useful tool just even for the intervention itself. Sometimes, the person might be reacting to not feeling like she's at home. So maybe we might lead her back to her room and show her her familiar object. A familiar routine can also be very essential to a person's well-being. A person being out of their routine, being told that they now have to shower in the morning when they always took a bath at night, can be a source of tension. So sometimes we have wiggle room, sometimes we don't. But again, being empathetic to the person's source of frustration can give us a hand. Sometimes it can help us redirect the person in that moment. Like, oh, well, we have a special activity today, so we're just going to do the shower in this morning. Is that all right with you? Always keeping that collaborative, validating tone with the person. We talked about before that, sometimes a person might have too much or too little stimulation. Sometimes a person might engage in a repetitive behavior. Sometimes, for example, the person I mentioned before who sings all the time, are they singing all the time maybe just out of boredom? Sometimes there are little compulsions that come with the disease, but sometimes it's coming out because there's no source of distraction. There's no source of fun for that person to go into, so they're creating their own. Going back to the people who are trying to leave the day center or the residence where they live, sometimes it's just looking for something to do. So having, like we talked about in the part on stimulation, sometimes just having that meaningful stimulation and tailored activities, and knowing also the routine of the person, maybe that can give us a hand. Maybe the person is going home to go watch their favorite game show at 3 o'clock, but if we intervene and bring them to a room and put it on for them, they're not going to want to go home anymore. They're home. They're getting what they wanted. I also wanted to mention inappropriate lighting. Same thing with the visual deficits. I might be more disoriented if I can't make out my environment properly. Dim lighting can affect, how what the person's seeing in their environment. They might be afraid to go into their room later in the day if the light isn't on because they see shadows in there and they think there are people waiting for them. And that's what happens. Sometimes we think, oh, the person's hallucinating. They're seeing people that aren't there, but it's not so much that their brain is creating an image, it's that it's misinterpreting the image that's already there. Same thing can happen with mirrors, the famous mirror example. The person who goes into their bathroom and he says, there's another man in my room. I think he wants to do me harm. Sometimes it's just that he walked into his bathroom and there was a mirror there and he's not able to recognize his own reflection. So we have to go into that reality of the person and sometimes physically adapt their environment to their needs. So, personal factors. So this is what where we're going to refer to the person's life story. Everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own skills, their own meaningful items and memories. And we talked about in communication stimulation how we can bring those out, leading to a better quality for the person. When a person is having a responsive behavior and we think that we have this challenging situation, there's no we put a list of example behaviors, but there's really no one size fits all recipe for any given behavior. Sometimes what helps with one client will help with the other, and that's great, but sometimes it's not quite the same. Even though the behavior looks the same, what's behind it is different for the individual. So if we have, for example, the example of the man who thinks that somebody stole from him, and we're trying to help him find his missing items, but he's not really sure what was stolen from him, and we're trying to reassure him and fight. Like, it can be different for the person that we think. It can be different for the person that thinks that a specific item was stolen and somebody who just lived a robbery in their life. That will matter because now it's not just finding that specific item and learning to always put it in the same place. This person just has a general sense that something is wrong all the time. And how we help them feel more secure and how we reassure them is going to be different because we're addressing a different problem. Maybe that person just needs to have, be told that, oh, yes, we checked, your valuables are with your daughter, she's keeping that jewelry safe, for example. This is where the family can really be your friend as a professional because they will tell you those stories where the person can't necessarily. Sometimes the person can, But sometimes you can get even more details with the family, even when the person does share something with you. Clarify the situation to better understand what the person is going through. When we talk about personal and cultural values, if I take another lady that her whole life she always lived with her sisters, and today she comes to live in a group home, and she's now sitting to dinner surrounded by men, and we wonder why she's not eating and why she's closing in on herself. Well, maybe that person should be sitting between two women because she feels intimidated by being surrounded by men today. It's not something that she's used for. It wasn't her reality before. Sometimes we have, especially with sundowning syndrome, the end of the day, evening can be a particularly challenging period sometimes for people. And part of that is things we talked about before, changes in lighting. The day is kind of winding down, all the activities tended to be before. And at the same time, we're like trying to get ready for dinner. And the person who all her life would prepare dinner around this time feels extra restless because she feels from her old routine that she should be doing something and she's not doing it and she feels wrong. We're all made to be busy. We all need something to do, and we need to be able to offer those opportunities to people, even if they have Alzheimer's, even if they can't do the exact same activities they did. We need to have an adaptive approach where they can still live some of that life story today, where they can still have some semblance of their routines from the past and do them today. Maybe that's a question of participating in setting the table. Maybe it's just being near the kitchen and asking the person, like, oh, what do you think of what we're doing now? What would you have to do, depending on their setting as well, right? So, interventional factors. So this is where, us as the professional comes in this dynamic. How are we contributing to these behaviors? We talked a lot about communication strategies and stimulation strategies previously, and again, all these can be used also by recognizing the triggers of these behaviors. All of this can be combined together to help prevent situations. Give the person meaningful activities, use the right communication strategies, and maybe we won't see as many of these responsive behaviors, these challenging situations. So it is important to be informed, like we said, about the personal factors, knowing the person's likes, their dislikes, their routines, their previous routines, using the right communication strategies. If I have somebody who wants to leave to go fishing, and he's restless because of that, well, maybe it's not possible to bring him fishing right now, but I can, bring it into conversation. Oh, you want to go fishing? Well, I wanted to do something else with you first. Would you mind coming with me? But tell me about fishing. I was thinking of going fishing. What are the best spots around here? Where did you having that conversation with him, and help that use that to transition to another activity that's possible in this moment. When we talk about us as the care professionals, our behaviors, our attitudes, our body language, our tone of voice, and what effect that can have, it's hard to be on all the time. Sometimes we are stressed out. We have a schedule, we have other clients to see, and we naturally get kind of stressed. And it's not necessarily against that person that we're working with right now. It's just this accumulated stress. And it shows non-verbally more often than not. So when we're in that moment, it's important to have that self-awareness because, as natural as these feelings are, your client will very often pick up on it and they will react to it and they will take some of their stress and some of your stress and become stressed themselves, and that can cause tension. So again, it's not to not recognize that it's normal to sometimes be stressed, on the job, but it makes it easier for yourself and especially for the other person when you have that awareness. That being said, even though we always want to grow as professionals, we want to have all the strategies, we want to totally be self-aware of our nonverbal all the time, it's important to address the challenges in your work situation other ways. That's the importance of being in a team through team meetings and even like one-on-one exchanges with other staff members, with your colleagues. Sometimes you cannot just build up with more strategies, exchange with them, find out, oh, well, this worked when I was there. Not just gain more knowledge, but also as a team come together and maybe discuss how certain tasks are distributed. If we know that the bath takes longer with a certain client because they're nervous, we're going to have a module about that too. If we know that it's going to take longer with this one person, maybe we distribute the clients a little differently among the different staff members. Maybe we do other ones first. Maybe that kind of planning, that kind of time management is just as important. And it's a team effort. It's important that you never feel alone as a professional. So in summary, we always want to adapt to the person. We want to adapt to the need that they're feeling in this moment. They might not be able to articulate it to us, but as we discussed previously, maybe we can help them articulate it a little better. Maybe we can interpret those cues and accurately define that need. Again, understanding the trigger, evaluating the need behind the behavior helps us to choose a more tailored and appropriate intervention and approach. We might not always be able to understand that need perfectly, however, we can only do our best. That's where, again, just having that toolbox of strategies to try, comes in handy. Sometimes, there's no one size fits all for addressing these behaviors. We have a toolbox, and it's important to recognize that sometimes a person wants reassurance and in the moment, and sometimes that person needs space, especially if they're frustrated with something. And sometimes that space can be good for you too. Give that person space in the moment, back off, think about another way to intervene, and try again a few minutes later. Sometimes we're so desperate to fix something, and really what it needs sometimes is just a little time. So again, one more little point I would make about that is sometimes the person, you're not sure exactly what will help, but they're telling you in that moment, no, I don't want this now. I don't want to sit down and eat right now. I don't want to go take a bath right now. I don't want to do this activity right now. It's important to respect the no. Again, we can't always satisfy exactly what the person has in their head right now. We can't let them necessarily leave the floor at this moment. It might not be realistic, but it's important that when the person gives you a negative response and they say no, that you don't contradict them, you don't confront them, you don't force the issue, because when you don't respect the no, you undermine that relationship with the client. You've just created a conflict situation, even though you were probably just trying to help. It's important that the person, again, feels validated, because no matter what that behavior is, it's coming from somewhere. There is a reason, and that reason is real and meaningful to the person. So on that note, I hope that this was beneficial to you. I hope that you found some useful information in this presentation. For more information, please contact us. We are always there to help. Thank you.